Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. The NFL annual meeting is currently going on in Orlando, and the owners approved a number of rule changes that are going to go into effect in the 2024 season. Now, there are a few things that are going to be welcome, but one change is particularly concerning and particularly confusing. And that's especially true in Philadelphia, where we're pretty well fed up with poor tackling. We might see more poor tackling in the 2024 season, thanks to the biggest rule change, the one that sparked the most controversy, the elimination of the hip drop tackle technique. Now, in order for us to understand what the NFL is trying to do here, we have to take a look at what is the rule specifically trying to ban. The rule is specifically banning grabbing the runner with both hands or wrapping the runner up with both arms and swiveling and dropping the tackler's hips or lower body, which would result in trapping the runner's legs at or below the knee. If that happens, it's an unnecessary roughness penalty and a loss of 15 yards for the defense. Now, I've been hesitant to do an episode on the rule changes, particularly because of this one, since it was just a proposal, and I didn't necessarily want to talk about breaking it down before the NFL decided whether or not it was going to be a thing. This was almost universally panned by coaches and players alike. So, I can see where a lot of this controversy is coming from. For the owners, they have investments. They want to make sure that their players are able to play safely. And as NFL executive Jeff Miller pointed out to the media in a press conference, the hip drop tackle resulted in an injury rate that was 20 times greater than regular tackling. I can get behind the player safety element. But the concerning part of it is that if you're going to enforce this in real time, that's going to have the side effect of causing a defender to be very hesitant about tackling the player. The defense, ultimately at a certain point, has to be able to tackle the player in order for the defense to be able to stop the score. So there's definitely controversy surrounding this because the coaches have to be able to teach it. The players have to be able to execute it in a way that's not going to draw the foul. And importantly, the officials have to be able to call it in a way that is clear and not confusing. Now, according to NFL Network's Tom Pelissero, the competition committee chair Rich McKay, who is the CEO of the Atlanta Falcons, indicated that officials will be allowed to call the penalty in the game as long as they actually see all three of the elements played out, especially the unweighting of the player into the ball carrier's legs. And so I get that, and I appreciate that coaching. As somebody who has officiated games, not NFL games, but lower level games in the past, that coaching is important. That helps the official understand what is a foul, what isn't. Here's the problem. Rich McKay did note that officials will not be able to get on-field officiating time practicing officiating this play. Why? Because this play isn't generally done, especially not during training camp, but also not during other practices. But since it's not during practice, and especially since it's not done during training camp when officials are going around and basically doing trial runs, getting themselves onto the field, getting themselves in scenarios where actual NFL players are actually performing plays and the officials will actually need to call those plays, you don't get those reps. And as somebody who did officiate, I appreciated the opportunities to go to scrimmages at the beginning of the season because those scrimmages allowed me to get into the groove and they allowed me to refresh myself and allowed me to be able to see different rule changes in action and be able to call those effectively. The officials, without that opportunity, are relying on broadcast film and all 22 footage in order to be able to learn what they're looking for. But there is no better teacher than being able to actually see it from the angle that you need to see it. Remember that officials only have one shot to view one play from one angle, and they have to make that call within a split second after the play occurring. Officials need to be able to see what it is from the perspective of an official. And that, I think, becomes the biggest concern. The training element of this has the potential to be insufficient. It's because of this that the NFLPA released a statement that indicated its own opposition to the rule change. They said that while players have consistently advocated for health and safety advancements, any prohibition on the hip drop tackle technique is unfair to players and unrealistic to implement. It places defensive players in an impossible position by creating indecision in the minds of any tackling player. It puts officials in an unreasonable situation that will result in inconsistent calls on the field and confuses our fans. Now, I did reach out to the NFL Referees Association, that's the union that represents the NFL game officials, for comment on the change and how the officials will be approaching it in practice. As of the time of this recording, I haven't heard anything from them. If I do get updates, I will share them with you. I'll also post any updates to birdsnestmedia.com, so make sure that you check that out as well. But at the end of the day, tackle football is an inherently risky sport. It's why players wear pads. It's why there's so much focus on health and safety. I get it. It's a dangerous play. It's a play that should be theoretically removed from football. But it should not be done in a way that's going to potentially negatively impact the game if it gets inconsistently called. And we know that we've had past experiences in the NFL where games have been inconsistently called and plays have been inconsistently called. Eagles fans don't need to look much farther than Super Bowl 57 for that example. Not only is this a technique that's taught at lower levels of the sport, but at a certain point to bring the player down, you have to be able to tackle them. Given that this will do nothing but sow doubt in the minds of defenders, because if they make the tackle and they do it wrong, it's going to cost them 15 yards. There are other ways to approach this. I've brought up fines. Fines honestly should be the primary way that this is officiated out of the game. When you have the benefit of replay review and time to go back in and check it, you have also now specific game footage you can share with the player saying, hey, this is not okay. Penalties in-game rely on that split-second judgment, and while officials do get it right 95% of the time, and they're getting paid the big money to be able to do that, it's that 5% of the time that's concerning. I absolutely do trust game officials, except when they're not fully trained. And this has an opportunity, like any rule change, to be rife with confusion. This is going to create nothing but problems, and it's just going to make the game worse through wrong calls, through errors that will result in the game changing. Definitely problems. And that's where this other change that was announced is going to be huge and going to be very helpful. It has nothing to do, unfortunately, with the hip drop tackle. The replay assistant will now be able to correct a roughing the passer or an intentional grounding call if the penalty was objectively incorrect. Now, this is huge, and it does come on the heels of Indianapolis Colts owner Jim Irsay pushing forward a rule change, which ultimately was withdrawn, that allowed for all fouls called on the field to be reviewable. It also comes a few seasons after the NFL's failed attempt to have pass interference be a reviewable call. But this is important. It's very limited in scope, and it only applies to these two penalties. So, what are the examples? Well, if a quarterback is outside of the pocket at the time that he throws the football, as long as the football makes it back to the line of scrimmage, it's not intentional grounding. So, if the officials call intentional grounding, the replay assistant can step in and say, wait, hang on, no, the quarterback was outside of the pocket and the ball made it to the line of scrimmage. Those are objective things. We can look at them. We can prove them on the replay. This is not intentional grounding. What would not be reviewable would be whether or not a receiver is in the area. That's a judgment call. That's one that the game officials on the field are empowered to make and is not subject to review under this exception. The fact that fouls have been judgment calls have been one of the biggest reasons why the NFL Competition Committee has been hesitant to allow for replay to correct a game official's call. Holding could theoretically be called on every play. One of the subjectivity elements to it is, does it actually have an impact on the play? If it does, the official should throw the flag. If it doesn't, you don't. But ultimately, the replay review standard is that the call on the field is presumed correct unless there is video evidence that is clear, incontrovertible, obvious to be able to overturn the call. If two people are able to reach different conclusions about something, we stick with the call on the field. That's the standard. So because of this, challenging penalties, waste of time under most situations. Now, I did reach out to an NFL spokesperson for info about whether this change will apply to coaches' challenges or whether or not it's only going to be reviewable by the booth. I haven't heard back as of the time of this recording, but I will keep you guys posted. Nonetheless, regardless of the answer, it's a definitely welcome change. It presents the opportunity to fix the call if it's wrong, which definitely helps the game go much smoother and helps remove potential errors, which helps remove the potential for the game to be changed by the guys wearing the stripes. Now, speaking of coaches' challenges, one rule change that did go through that was proposed by a team, this was the Detroit Lions, also has an impact on coaches' challenges. What it does is it allows a team to get a third coaches' challenge if they are successful on one of their two coaches' challenges. The previous rule was that each team got two challenges, and if they got both challenges correct, they would then receive a third challenge. This rule changes that, so that way they only have to get one of the two correct. As with all other coaches' challenges, the team still has to have a timeout to spare, so that's important. But ultimately, this is going to be something that'll give teams a little bit more flexibility to make sure that the game is going correctly and is being called correctly. The last big rule change was a rule enforcement procedure that was put forward by the competition committee. If the offense commits an unnecessary roughness or an unsportsmanlike conduct foul, then turns the ball over, and a foul occurs by the original defense, historically, the offensive foul would have been ignored. What's going to happen now is that the penalties will offset in terms of the play is going to be replayed, but the 15-yard penalty that the offense would have committed, unnecessary roughness, unsportsmanlike conduct, will be enforced. So they're trying to make sure that the enforcement of the big fouls, the 15-yarders, still happens. That's one of the reasons why other rules are in place, especially surrounding the 5 and 15 special enforcement procedure, where if the defense, say, commits an offsides and the offense commits offensive pass interference, the defensive offsides is ignored and the offense is penalized 15 yards. So overall, there was a mixture of good and bad in the rules changes. Definitely some positive improvements, definitely some areas of concern. We will see how those areas of concern are addressed going forward into the 2024 NFL season. But while I have concerns about the hip drop tackle, I am a fan of the other changes that were made because they help remove the official as a cause for concern in the game. But let me know what you think in the comments below about these changes. And thank you so much to everybody for tuning in to the Bird's Nest Podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest Podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Amazon Podcasts, and Spotify. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles coverage. And if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below or at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles!